What's up, everyone? Welcome to Game Conclave. This is Vberg. We have got our Sunday Game and News roundup from last week. So let's kick it off by hopping into the upcoming games that are releasing this week and DLC that we're also excited for. Alright, first up we've got The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which is launching on PC on April 3rd. If you are somehow not familiar with this game or series that has never been controversial in any way, shape, or form, it's from Naughty Dog, the creators of Jak and Daxter and Uncharted. This is their third-person post-apocalyptic survival horror series, and it has one of the best and worst stories ever told in gaming, depending on who you ask. The only thing that people actually seem to agree on is that this game does have great gameplay, great graphics, and acting. Alright, and the only other thing coming up this week that we were excited for, since the other games got pushed back, so you'll have to stay tuned for the Sunday News show later on to see what those were, but the other thing we're excited about for was the DLC for Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes. We have already gotten Sane and Marissa's DLC, and this one is going to be focused on Markus. In it, you'll be playing as Noah and Carrie and Markus, and they'll be traveling back in time to when Markus was still alive, learning about the events of his past through a mysterious teleportation gateway that seems to be a distorted menhir. So yeah, Markus was one of my favorite characters. He's hilarious in the plays in particular. I can't wait to learn more about him. If you're not familiar with Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes, check out our Underrated Games of 2024 video, part 1. We'll link it in the description. This was a great RPG from 2024. Alright, as for new game announcements and DLC announcements, last week actually had a metric crap ton of stuff announced, but most of that was at the Nintendo Direct, which we already covered in a separate video, so we'll link that in the description for you as well. But other than that stuff, there wasn't really too much that was announced that caught our eye, except for, oh, hey, Trails Beyond the Horizon. The latest entry in the Trails series is going to be dropping this fall stateside, which means we're getting a total of 3 Trails games this year. That's kind of crazy. It used to take them years to get titles here. So they must not have been kidding around when they said that they were seriously working on upping the pace of their localization. This is a great RPG series. If you've been tuning in for a while, you've probably heard me compare it a million times to like the MCU of JRPGs, and yeah, that's pretty much what it is. It's going to be on the PS4, PS5, Switch, and PC later this year.
Take this! You're a worthless piece of human waste!
Alright, another one that caught our eye is Sigilfarer. This is going to be a roguelite RPG that's going to be all about the dice rolling. You'll explore a procedurally generated world with your party, meaning no 2 playthroughs are ever the same. You'll manage your supplies, upgrade your gear, fight off enemies in turn-based combat, and craft and modify your dice in a unique dice building system. This one's being made by Viabo Games, a small indie studio from Poland, and it's only going to be released on PC at this time. We don't have an exact release date yet, but it is coming later this year. Alright, and what time is it? That's right, it's time for the Rumor Mill. Alright, there really wasn't a lot of those floating around last week, but there was one particularly interesting one. According to a leaker, the Switch 2 pre-orders will be going live on April 9th, which would be a week after the upcoming Switch 2 Direct. We'll be covering that later in the week, so make sure you check that out. But in addition to this pre-order rumor, the leaker is also claiming that the Switch 2 will be available for release as early as June 9th. So yeah, we're gonna, see if that's true or not. I expect during the Switch 2 Direct, it's presumably gonna tell us whether or not these statements are true or are just more internet BS. Alright, in time for some game sales update figures. According to Koei Tecmo, the publisher of the Atelier series, Atelier Yumia has crossed 300,000 units, making it the fastest selling Atelier game to date. And I am sure Gust, the studio behind the Atelier series, is very pleased. This is a great little series. If you dig crafting and stories centered around little magical girls, it's worth checking out. If that's not your jam, this may not do it for you, but we like it. Alright, this next one's kind of a sales update, kind of not a sales update. I don't know, it sort of is. It's a location-specific one. We've mentioned in the past that Shuhei Yoshida, the former president of Sony Interactive Entertainment, has retired, and he's been doing the interview rounds all over the place with all the big gaming outlets and podcasts and yada yada yada, so he never talks to us. We're not worth his time. But he was kind of gushing in an interview about what a great game Ghost of Tsushima was. And he mentioned that it was the first Western game to break 1 million units sold in Japan since Crash Bandicoot in 1998. And we gotta know that was just like a crazy thing that a Western game hasn't broken 1 million units in Japan since 1998. I mean, that's a very, very long time span. If you're not aware, the Japanese market doesn't really have a lot of exposure to Western games. In fact, that was something that Yoshida mentioned in the interview that he was trying to change. He was trying to get some of their Western properties to be a little bit more high profile, and there's just really not a lot of familiarity with Western games. Like they might vaguely be aware of them, but they don't really sell very well. So, to give you an example, huge games like The Witcher 3 and Skyrim, which pretty much everyone into gaming in the West knows, both of those games have individually sold more than 50 million units. And in Japan, both of those games have sold less than 100,000 copies. So Japan accounts for like less than 1% of their total sales. They just, they don't really buy a lot of Western games. They have their own style and aesthetics that they dig. And yeah, that's cool. That's fine. That's their thing. But it's just super interesting to know that when you think of like this giant, huge, monstrous game that like almost everyone might know of in your region, you can leave and go to another part of the world and they might have no idea what you're talking about. And it's just super crazy to just stop and think about for a moment that like whatever your favorite big giganto game is, you could literally go to another part of the world and they've never even heard of it. But it's like so ubiquitous within, your part of the world and your circle. It's just one of those things that always gives you kind of perspective. All right, and on to the general news. First up, we've got a really fun story about Split Fiction. Did you know that it is now a world record holder for co-op game sales in 48 hours, co-op game sales in the first week, and co-op concurrent player count? Well, now you do. Split Fiction now holds the Guinness World Record for all three of those things. Now, we might all be able to agree that those are kind of goofy things to make world records about. They kind of are, but hey, Split Fiction's an awesome game. It's a good thing for them. So we're happy about it here at Game Conclave, and we're happy for Hazelight Studios. It's one of the best games I've played this year. If you haven't checked it out, you should definitely check out our review, see if it's your kind of game. We'll link it in the description. It was a ton of fun. I played it with my wife. We spent like a whole weekend and a couple extra days playing it. Just a blast. Tons of fun. All right, so what's going to be some sad news for some folks? We have to retract some info we reported on a few weeks back. And that was that Hogwarts Legacy was getting DLC and a definitive edition update, because Warner Brothers Games have canceled both of those things. Now Hogwarts Legacy 2 is still in development, but for some bizarro reason, the company that is hemorrhaging cash after their colossal live service disaster, Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, which was such a colossal failure of a game, it managed to kill a separate studio that didn't even make the game because it was so terrible. So you'd think that releasing DLC for their, actually successful title, Hogwarts Legacy, which sold 30 million units over the last 2 years, would be, I don't know, a no-brainer. But I guess I'm dumb. I don't understand the plans and things that some of these major studios do. So they're ditching their DLC for Hogwarts Legacy. They're ditching a definitive edition, which would have had the DLC, bundled with the game because of reasons. Yeah, they are going to focus on the sequel, which I guess at least is a smart idea. I can agree that one's a good idea. It just seems like if you make a huge game that sells something like 30 million units, having some kind of follow-up to get people reinvested into it, it's probably a good idea. But, what do I know? I'm just an idiot with a mic. All right, and this one was originally going to go in our sales update figure section, but more happened on this story, so we moved it into this section of general news. That was Assassin's Creed Shadows. They have announced now that it has 3 million players. But again, they're not really using sales figures, they're not using reach, they're just continuing with this vague terminology of number of players. And that works and makes sense when I think it's an online-focused game, which this isn't. And I would like to know more about what the number of players here means. Like, we all know that there's a huge contingent of people out there who go and they buy a game on Steam, play for like a minute and 30 seconds, just so they can legitimize whatever take they have on the game, and then return it before that 2-hour window so that they can, review bomb about whatever it is they're angry about. And I don't really particularly care about that. I don't think that someone leaving those reviews like that or on Metacritic is any different than someone that just goes and, types 10/10 perfect game ever everyone else wrong. Like, I mean, I think that user reviews have just already, like, become as useless as many critic scores. Like, scores don't mean anything. It's just fluff. But yeah, anyway, I think that the game isn't doing as well as they wanted. And, you know, we don't have an agenda here. We don't particularly care how well the game does. Okay, actually, that's a lie. I love Assassin's Creed, and I do want it to do well, but I also want it to be a good game. And I haven't played this one, and I know the consensus is pretty mixed on it. You know, I've looked at some other people's reviews. I've, you know, checked out some comments. You know, some people seem to love it. Some people seem to hate it. Some people say the stealth's better than it ever was. Some people say the story's awful. Some people love the characters. Like many things, it's just got a mixed reception, you know. So, but the reason that we think the game's not doing as well as they hoped is, again, they're using that vague terminology. They're not saying definitively how many copies they've sold. They just keep using this metric of player numbers, and that is fine. But now they have sold part of the Assassin's Creed series, as well as the Far Cry series and Ghost Recon series, to the Chinese publishing studio Tencent. They technically, what they did is created a subsidiary company of Ubisoft. That 75% is owned by Ubisoft, but Tencent now owns the other 25% of that company, and therefore those franchises. So if the game was doing as well as they had wanted it to or had hoped they would, I don't think that they would be partially selling off these franchises to Tencent, but that's just our opinion. You know, we're not market analysts here. We're just adults with full-time jobs who do this on the side. We just love video games, and we love to tell people about video games and just kind of have a chat. So we're just, you know, be an armchair analyst here, but it seems reasonable to conclude that it didn't do as well as they had wanted it to, because if it had been the amazing success they're claiming it was, there'd be no need to sell part of these franchises off to another publishing company. Okay, and the final story we have today is about Grand Theft Auto 6, because yeah, it's still the most anticipated game of the year. And this is actually two stories we had about it that we kind of just smushed together. So first off, from the Game Business article by Christopher Dring, they interviewed several bigwigs at game publishing companies who were essentially complaining that Grand Theft Auto is causing havoc and chaos and problems for them because they don't know when the hell it's going to launch. And so they can't plan their release windows and various live service game updates around avoiding Grand Theft Auto's first 2 weeks of sales window, which is kind of understandable. If you're releasing an open world action game, or you've got a big, you know, title update plan for your online game that's filled with any kind of deathmatchy chaos or sandbox aspects, you know, your player base might take a serious hit, you know, for a minute there. So it'd be better to plan around that. But unfortunately, they know as little as us about when the game is coming out, so there's no real way to plan around it. And then the second story, which is just kind of tied into that one. So the CEO of Take-Two revealed that, you know, a few days after those complaints were coming out, that they were intentionally not releasing any information about release windows or when the game was going to drop because they want to, you know, keep up building maximum anticipation for Grand Theft Auto 6. Yeah, so I just thought that was kind of funny, like whether or not it was intentional, you know, maybe that interview was already like done before those CEOs were complaining and it just didn't get, you know, written and published till after. You don't know. But it was almost like he was kind of like flipping them the bird in a way, you know, like all these other CEOs and heads of marketing and publishing were like, you know, like, oh gosh, you're making all these problems for us. And like, you know, the CEO of Take-Two is just like, yeah, screw it, I don't care. We're going to do what's best for our game. And yeah, you know, that's understandable for them. But yeah, it was really funny that he was just like, you know, whatever. We're doing this on purpose and you can't stop us. So yeah. It's so rock star to do something like that. What about you though? Like, are you still on the hype train for Grand Theft Auto? So you found any of these stories funny, interesting, or even depressing? Be sure to let us know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give us a like and subscribe. And as always, from all of us here at Game Conclave, thank you so much for watching.